Beth Palmer is the Chief Operation Officer for Monterey-Downs, a land use lawyer in real property development, specializing in land use planning and equine law, having worked at both law firms and horse farms throughout her career.
As Janet said, my name is Beth Palmer. I'm the COO of Monterey-Downs, and I am here to talk to you about our project. Before we get right into the project, let's just jump into the issues. Let's talk water. In 1998, Ford contracted with the Marina Coast Water District to provide water to the former Fort Ord, the Ord community. They contracted to provide 6,600 acre-feet of groundwater, which was the historical use by the Army. So what was used by the Army previously is what is to be used now on the redevelopment. MCWD also contracted to provide another 2,400 acre-feet of augmented water, which is what was required under the EIR for the base reuse. On January 21st of this year, Marina Coast moved forward, the Board of Directors voted to move forward on a desal plant to provide 2,700 acre-feet of augmented water, which is the 2,400 that Fort Ord needs, plus another 300 acre-feet. So all of this is moving forward. Total of 9,000 acre-feet per year. But what happens? What happens if somehow during the development or something happens that augmented water doesn't come forward? So we prepared for that. And what Monterey-Downs is doing is we've split the project into 44 different phases, which you can see in this map. Every time we go to record a phase with the city of Seaside, for example, if I want to record that piece right there, I have to prove water. Water is available that minute. That is under California Government Code 66473.7B1. I cannot record it, I cannot start the construction, I cannot take a tree down, I cannot grade, I cannot do anything on any one of these 44 phases without water being available. This is a safeguard we're putting together for the community. So the desal's going forward, everything's moving forward, and as a safeguard, it's not going to go through until that water is there right then. Okay, let's talk trees and the division of land, how we got this land. When the base was first set to be closed, the Department of the Army in 1991 sent out notices to everybody saying who would like part of this land. We have 28,000 acres, we're dividing it up. Between 1991 and 1993, 28 federal, state, and local agencies requested land. This is that map. Without the yellow, that's the map of all that land. The Bureau of Land Management, BLM, requested 15,086.58 acres. That is a very exact number. They picked exactly what they wanted. State Parks requested 2,020 acres. The land in yellow is what nobody wanted. That's what nobody out of the 28 federal, state, and local agencies wanted. That's where development is. Monterey-Downs and on the other developments are all on the land nobody requested when they had free rein to choose whatever they wanted. So the question is, why didn't they want this land? You hear about this land, it's got trees on it, it's got everything. Why didn't BLM want it? Well, let's look at it. If you look at the trees, why didn't BLM want them? Well, 93% of those trees are dead, poor, or fair quality. Only 7% of the trees are a good quality tree. BLM didn't choose this land. They could have and they didn't. On our project, we're preserving 24% of these trees. The remainder of the trees must be mitigated. That's by replanting those that can be saved, planting new ones on the property, planting them off-site, or paying fees into a fund to go purchase other land and keep that open space. The mitigation will likely be a combination of everything, and it's actually determined by the City of Seaside as part of the approval. So of the trees, the dead, poor, and fair quality trees that come out are being replaced with new, excellent quality trees that we're required to monitor for a minimum of 5 years to ensure that they're healthy and viable. Let's talk about the cemetery. Everybody keeps hearing about the veteran cemetery. The cemetery itself is split into 3 categories. There's an endowment fund, there's a burial section, and there's a mitigation section. The center part is the burials. That itself is divided into 3 categories: the columbarium, the in-ground burials, and the ancillary parcels. The columbarium's all set. We had the groundbreaking a couple weeks ago. That's the building where the urns go in. You then have the in-burial section. That is also moving forward. They just received a donation of $1.2 million from an estate going forward with the state of California. The third section are the ancillary parcels. That's where the museum, non-denominational chapel, Veterans Hall, that's where everything goes. The ancillary parcels are not considered part of the state cemetery and are not available for federal funding. So when your government officials say the cemetery is done, that's because in their view, their part of it is done. But it doesn't include the ancillary parcels, which has always been a part of the master plan for the cemetery. So 2/3 of the cemetery is done. RER, EIR, specific plan, and what we're doing takes care of that final 1/3. So looking at the base reuse plan, when it was put together, again looking at everything that was decided on in 1993 and who wanted what land, the green is the open space, your blue is your educational, and your pink is your development, and the purple is what the Army kept. So the 3 E's, environment, education, and economic recovery. Environment, 21,000 out of 28,000 acres are preserved. You've got 72% of the base. On the education side, CSU has been created, enrollment's up every year. You have the other schools, Monterey Peninsula College, Monterey College of Law, UC Santa Cruz, MPC, they're all going forward. That leaves us with economic recovery. We need jobs, we need tax base, we need housing for the civilians who are moving in because it's only the military housing that's been there, and we need businesses to build up upon the tourism. So just like the cemetery, 2/3 of the project is done, we need to finish the final third. That's what our project does. If you look at the pink section in the center, right here, that's where we are located. So you look at that and it seems like a big project. Everybody's heard how big a project is. This is the project. We're actually on less than 2% of the land that is former Fort Ord. So it is a big project, but in the scope of the size of the base, we're less than 2% of the land. So now I'll go into the various components. What this project does is it balances nature with everyday living. It's a village community project. It's got jobs, tourism, recreation, education, and a residential component. That's how the base was set up under the design guidelines, was to have villages, and that's what we've designed. Start with the residential. It's outlined in red here. You can see just in January, KSBW did a story about the housing manager for the county said more housing is needed. That's what we're helping to provide. We've got apartments and we've got single-family residences. Single-family residences are between 1,200 and 3,100 square feet. They're centered with smaller yards around community parks. We also have a fire station site, tennis and swim center, extended stay style hotel. You can see in the corner here. The fire station site is up. We're not sure how fire services, again, we're looking 10 years out into the future through the build. Right now, if it was built, the Presidio would provide fire services. Because we don't know how long they'll be there, we don't know if it'll be done by the city of Seaside or regional fire. So therefore, the site is there if it's needed. If it's not needed, it just stays trees, it stays what it is. On the hotel, it's an extended stay hotel. That's the kind with the kitchenettes where you can go. It's there to cater toward business travelers, parents of students, guests for events, people who want to go to the National Monument. Here's a place for them to stay right there. The Tennis and Swim Center has both recreational and competitive events available to the community. Country Walk. Centrally located in the project, here again in red, is our Country Walk project, which is an open-air town center. It has outdoor cafes, shops, restaurants, museums, farmers market. It is a pedestrian-only village, no cars. So you'll be able to go out, you'll have the kids there, you'll have the safety of the cars. It's not a big box facility, it's a small town center. The horse park, getting into the active recreation side. The horse park is approximately 110 acres at the south side of the project here, and they have equestrian shows. It's similar to what Pebble Beach used to have. You have people who come in, it's all disciplines, Western and English. People trailer in, they bring their horses, their grooms, their riders, their trainers, their families. They come in, they stay in the hotels, they eat in the restaurants, they add to the tax base, they go. You have your local shows that are local people around one day. When it's built out, you can have the larger shows that are 5 days in length. When they're not doing the shows, they do a lot of community benefits. They'd like to host, they're working to have an equestrian team at CSUMB, have it hosted here. They work with equine therapists who specialize in PTSD and other for children, and then they also do local youth programs, keeping kids on horses and off the streets. So there are programs like those here, and they're going to be a place for those. So looking at the sports arena and the event center, on the north side of the project is where we have our other part, and we have both two sections to it. We have an indoor section and an outdoor. Starting with the indoor, you can see the sports arena here. So you have a 1,500 seat grandstand, that's on the outside, connected to an inside frame. They share a restaurant, they share an area here. Here's the inside of how it can be configured. Up here you can see concerts, basketball, hockey. These are just samples of what we have. And they can go, just depending on the setup, between 5,000 and 6,500 seats. One thing you'll notice here is there's a hockey rink in all three of those pictures. Why is that? That is a practice rink. So when you have a minor league hockey team, they need to practice all the time regardless of what's going on in the main facility. We've been working with the San Jose Sharks to bring their farm team here. They used to have one in San Francisco. They don't have it, so now they're out of Massachusetts. They can't have people going back and forth to Massachusetts to play here. They need a local place to have their team. We've been working with them for that. You can also have basketball, concerts, you see the options. So looking at a comparison to Del Mar, which is a lot of what people do for the project, we are similar in the components, a much larger facility than we are, but it has a different component, so we look at it. Del Mar's a public facility owned by the state of California, so all their information is public. So here's what they did in 1 month, and I picked May 2012. They had, in 1 month, they had Cirque du Soleil, they had a prom, they had a roller derby, they had a quilting festival, all these different things. These are the things that you can do throughout the year in the center. Moving to the outside part of the facility, this is where you have the horse training and the 1,500 seat grandstand. So this is set up as a thoroughbred training center to develop young racehorses, rehabilitate older ones. They leave 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, trailer up to Golden Gate, come back, and then they would train here. We are looking to have live racing. We're looking at no more than 50 days. We're actually looking at 38 days total. So that would be about 9 weeks, 4 days a week. That's it. That's the maximum. We have to be licensed by the California Horse Racing Board, but that's what we'd be looking at, 38 days. So one of the things that this brings is an industry of new jobs. You're looking at grooms, stable hands, exercise riders, barn foremen, assistant trainers, veterinarians, registered veterinarian technicians. This is an industry that does not currently exist here. This is 1,015 full-time jobs that we're bringing in, and we're not taking them from another place of the county. It's a new industry, and they're new jobs that are being created. But since we're only looking at 38 days of racing, what do you do the rest of the time? Again, looking at Del Mar, some of the things they do is the infield of that track they use for youth athletic fields. You also have concerts. You can see here, you've got the grandstand looking at the concert. They have their San Diego Fair in the infield. They have a mud run. They use things all the time. Again, if you're looking at racing, which is what people seem to be afraid of, we're looking at 38 days, and the rest of it is used for other tourism and recreational activities. Looking at the horse racing industry, people have had some questions about the health of it. Here's from a 2015 fact book. You can see on the racing statistics by year, 2014 by earnings is much higher. We're definitely on an upcline, and on a national average, in 2014, $10.5 billion was put into on the handle of racing. So that is what was bet. This is not an industry that's dying. It's very alive and well. It's changing itself in that you're using smaller fair venues of about 1,500 seat. You don't need the large Coliseum-like ones. You have the indoor arenas like we have for sports and basketball and all of those, and then you have this on the outside. Looking at open space on the project, we have 100 acres, 18%. You have the preserve in the center, and then one of the things you'll notice on the dashed lines here around the roads, the request of the community, what we've done is we heard people didn't want to drive by and see a big development. So along the roads, we've set it back. Depending on where the road's going on grading, you're looking at between 30 and 100 feet between the road and where the development is, filled with trees. Part of what we'll be replanting, we replant in these areas. That'll keep the country feel when you're driving through so you don't see it. Then within those, you can see along the trails that are within the roads, within here, There's all trails throughout the project, so people still be able to go through. You'll notice those 2 yellow stars. These are staging areas we're putting in. So these are staging areas where you can come, start, go out into the preserve, go out into the open space, come back, have lunch. You have the one that's near Country Walk that has a bike center, dog barn. If you want to walk your dog, give them a place to rest while you go to lunch. Horse tie-ups. They have restrooms, parking lots. For people who want to skip the development side of things, there's the one over here on the other side of the horse park. And so that one's a little bit more minimal. You have your RV parking. You can bring horse trailers in, parking, restrooms, barns there. People can go out, park there, go right out. One thing that's important to notice, we don't actually touch the National Monument. We do not border it. There is a buffer of county open space between us and the National Monument. So people will come here, they'll go through that county land before they get to the National Monument. Looking at educational opportunities, what are the other things we do for the community? One of the things when you have a new state-of-the-art facility, especially in the equine world, we have equipment that no school could afford to have. So you build in laboratories, you build in classrooms that students can use. This is a big area for animal sciences. We want to work toward that. There was a registered veterinarian technician program that Hartnell had to give up. We've been working to bring that back. You also, outside of that, have culinary institutes, hotel management. There's a lot of things outside the equestrian world that we do bring as well. This is all in addition to part-time jobs for the students that they go through. Tourism and recreation, this is the cornerstone. We talked about that in the event center, the different things we have, how we add to that. That's a big part of the economy in this area. Let's talk jobs. So construction jobs are interesting because even though you have a 10, 15-year build-out, you're not allowed to count construction jobs in your numbers because they do have an end zone. So we're on average 500 construction jobs over the course of 10 to 15 years, but they don't actually count in our numbers. So looking at the permanent jobs that do count, looking at office, hospitality, management, retail, recreation, non-equestrian jobs, you're looking at 1,743. That's non-horse-related jobs. That's in addition to the 1,015 horse jobs that we talked about earlier. So you're looking at 2,758 full-time equivalent jobs as a result of the project. These are just our on-site projects. You also have indirects off-site that we don't include in our numbers. Looking at the economic benefits, we can break this up between regional benefits and we can break it up into City of Seaside. Starting with the regional benefits. On Fort Ord, all of the development pays fees, developer fees. We pay $40 million in the developer fees. What that does is it goes towards a capital improvement program that FORA puts together. 25 cents of every dollar goes into an endowment fund to pay for open space. They believe the open space on the base is going to cost $39.1 million. So for open space, it's not free. For ecotourism, that's supposed to bring in all the dollars, they believe they need an endowment fund of $40 million. The development has to pay for that. We're $10 million of it. There's also another $17 million that comes from developer fees that goes to a water augmentation program. These are things that the developments pay for. We bring in about, looking at the events, $100 million in annual revenues. Thinking that Fort Ord, when it was open, was about $500 million, bringing about 20% back from when the base was there. Looking at the City of Seaside benefits, we generate annual revenue of about $3.5 million to the City of Seaside. Now from that, you have to take out your fire services, and this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the fire station site. If the Presidio stays and that does the services, then your net to the City of Seaside is $1.6 million. If the Presidio goes away and County Regional services it, that's $1.9 million to the City of Seaside. And then if they decide that they need their own fire station site and that has to get built and that goes somewhere, then we pay our fair share cost of that, and that would bring it to $700,000. It's a $750 million project to build. Of that, about $200 million will be spent directly in the City of Seaside in labor, materials, and services. And then finally, the one thing to look at is, we talked about all of the different events and everything that goes on in the event center. Those revenue numbers are not included in our revenue numbers. On a conservative, to make sure that we don't, so you're not relying on X number of events a year, X number of that revenue is not included in these numbers, but the expenses are. That is the most conservative way the city has asked us to do it. That's how you do these things. So they assume they're in there for expenses, but not there for revenue, and that's how they make sure they're getting conservative numbers. So with this, I'm going to end. I thank you, and if anybody has any questions, I guess Janet will have them after. Thank you.
Michael Salerno is our next speaker. He is speaker for the Keep Fort Ord Wild and a founding member. And Michael, you're on next.
Thank you, Janet. Thank you, everyone, for coming today. So I'll be presenting the arguments against MontereyDowns. I have to say that when I was putting this presentation together, it was a little bit difficult to choose the arguments against MontereyDowns because there's so many of them. But I did choose. First, I'm going to go into a little bit who's Keep Fort Ord Wild. We are a group that was formed in 2011. We're a community coalition dedicated to the preservation of trails, recreation, wildlife, and habitat on Fort Ord. Let me go through this a little quickly. We support sensible, economically viable redevelopment of the extensive blight within the urban footprint of the former base, and believe that the existing open space should be preserved for the enjoyment of future generations. Before I get into the arguments against MontereyDowns, what I'd like to show everybody is what's out there. Why is this important? Why are people so worked up about this particular development? So what I wanted to do is just briefly demonstrate what's out there. What's out there now is the coastal oak forest. It's really the last coastal oak forest in California. It's irreplaceable. The Army left behind a world-class trail system that is used by the locals. It's accessible to people of all ability levels. It's earned the nickname Happy Trails, and that's because it's relatively flat compared to the acreage on the National Monument, which tends to be steep and more foreboding for casual users. There's paved roads out there, which are great for riding bikes away from cars. There's people of all ages. If you go out there, you'll see young people, you see elderly people, you'll see disabled people. All kinds of different people are using this land right now. There's wildlife. I'll go through some photos, demonstrate the wildlife. This is truly the Garland Park for marina and seaside residents. This is the projects outlined here. A very popular access point is 8th and Giggling. And the pictures I'm going to run through, all of these photos are taken on land that would be cleared for the MontereyDowns project. So there's families out there. There's an example of the paved roads, kids riding bikes. I'll just index through some of these. This particular photo is taken where the stadium would be built. Example of the trails. There's one of those dead oaks. There's a lot of wildlife. If you go out there any given day, you will probably see wildlife. Bobcats, wild turkeys. These are taken. These pictures are taken where the shopping area would go. Coyotes. This is something I want to demonstrate. This is a picture I took a couple months ago. An average Sunday, a nice day. There were over 65 cars at this one entrance. There was no special event this day. There was no special thing that was going on. These were just locals and people from out of the area coming to use this land. There was no advertising, nothing compelling these people to go there other than their desire to use these trails. So the big news, why many of us are here today, is the Downs EIR is finally out after many years of delay. So what are the big takeaways? 41,000 trees removed. 605 acres will be graded and disturbed, they call it. A good way to visualize this is that's roughly the size of Carmel by the Sea. 852 acre-feet of water are required. The big news in the EIR was, hey, there's not enough water to complete all the phases. They admitted the track and the stadium will be left out until more water is available. So I like to say, KFOW, the activists, and all the public records, we weren't kidding. The activists have been going to meetings, talking about this for years, and the numbers are really there. I'm going to quickly go through 5 topics: the electorate, water, tree loss, which we should start really calling deforestation. We're talking about 41,000 trees. The annexation of this land, and then briefly economics and jobs. So what does the Monterey County electorate think about development in the Fort Ord backcountry? A little history. Many of you may remember the Whispering Oaks project. That was a county project that was rejected unanimously by the Planning Commission. And that project was for a business park and bus depot in the Fort Ord backcountry. It was adjacent to where MontereyDowns is proposing his project, but not very far away. The public reacted strongly to this because that project was going to remove 4,500 oak trees. For some unknown reason, the Board of Supervisors approved it, and activists and locals, and this is about voting, or League of Women Voters, 18,000 registered voters certified a referendum to overturn the Board of Supervisors' decision. And in that case, they had to rezone the land to allow for heavy commercial. Ultimately, the county listened to the voters and rescinded all the approvals and the rezoning. They decided not to take it to an election because no one was going to run a counter campaign against the registered voters. 2 years later, we had Measure K. You guys may remember Measure K was funded by the MontereyDowns. That was an initiative that would have customized the reuse plan to accommodate their project. It would have made the 4 approvals a lot easier if that had passed. Voters did not approve Measure K. And here's some of the stats, and these are from the elections department. 62% of county residents voted against Measure K. This was a county initiative. 55% of Seaside residents voted against Measure K. And this is important because all the approvals for this project are going to take place in Seaside. So there's a history where voters are clearly opposed to development in the Fort Ord backcountry. They want to see blighted areas removed. And we're at the point now where the planning efforts are clearly at odds with public sentiment. Let's get to water. So the EIR is now out, as I mentioned. The overall water use for MontereyDowns will be 852 acre-feet. Now, an acre-foot is the equivalent of 1 acre, 1 square acre covered in 1 foot of water. So you can imagine how much water that really is. Among the water uses that really stand out are 75 gallons a day for every horse at MontereyDowns. The residents only get 55. That's the state minimum, by the way. Another egregious water use, 200 days per year of dust control. That's watering dirt at horse arenas. Now, if you've ever tried to add another bathroom or sink to your house locally, you know how irritating that is. Ironically, they released the EIR the same week, for the first time ever, the state of California declared mandatory rationing. Jerry Brown said, "This historic drought demands unprecedented action." And we're all ordered to cut back by 25%. So as you can see, this proposal is at odds with that 25% mandatory cutback. Real quickly, going through the history a little bit of water and what's available. The base reuse plan allocated 6,600 acre-feet of paper water, not actually wet water, paper water for development on Fort Ord. The 6,600 acre-feet was the peak use by the Army in 1984. So it was a year they used a lot of water. Maybe they washed all the equipment or something, nobody knows. The actual historical use was closer to 5,200 acre-feet. The data showed over time that even pumping at that level the Army had to abandon its wells by the coast because they sequentially became intruded with seawater. Another thing to remember about the water use is when the base was open, nobody paid for water. There was no restriction on how much water you could use. So there was no incentive to save water. So the 6,600 acre feet of paper water is not really a goal or a benchmark that we ever want to go back to, mostly because we know if we get back to it, we're going to cause seawater intrusion. And a quick note is, as I mentioned, this caused the Army to move its wells inland. The wells supplying Fort Ord now are on the extreme eastern edge of Fort Ord because of the seawater intrusion. So under the reuse plan, all jurisdictions got a certain allocation from FORA. And since this project is happening in Seaside, everyone's looking at Seaside's water allocation. Seaside's original allocation was 710 acre feet. Over time, the FORA board has raised this. It's now 1,012 acre feet. It was to accommodate more development in Seaside. And there's no more in reserve. FORA used to keep a strategic reserve so that it could allocate as necessary. There's nothing left. Despite having its allocation raised twice, Seaside has gone past its limit. They've allocated more water than the 1,012 acre feet already. So they really don't have anything, in our opinion, to allocate to this project. The project also straddles the county land, which has its own water allocation of 177.5 acre feet. It should be noted that if the county gives up all its water for MontereyDowns, it wouldn't be able to do anything else in terms of building on the remaining county acreage. So for example, if the county wanted to put in a campground, park facility, any other buildings, it would not have any water. All the water for MontereyDowns is going to come from Zone 2C. That is part of the overdrafted Salinas groundwater basin. If you live in Zone 2C, you know that you've been paying property tax assessments for many years to keep the basin in balance. Unfortunately, we discovered in 2014, the most recent data, seawater intrusion is still moving ahead. The EIR relies heavily on recycled water, which sounds good, but over time, recycled water is becoming a declining resource. So if you can imagine with the implementation of rationing programs, for example, what the governor has just put into effect, there's going to be less water going down drains in Peninsula homes. All that water flows to the recycled water plant over in Marina. So when water becomes more expensive and it's rationed, there's going to be less recycled water to go around. A quick comment about the desalination plant. There's a proposal for a desalination plant that Marina Coast will build. It was in front of the FORA board a few weeks ago. The FORA board decided not to take any action on it, basically punted on it. It is coming back in front of the FORA board again on Friday. There's a lot of issues with Marina Coast building a desal plant, not the least of which is there's a competing proposal from Cal-Am adjacent to it. We don't think this is a feasible water supply for MontereyDowns. It's extremely speculative. So let's talk about the trees. 41,000 trees removed for MontereyDowns. That's a huge number. If anybody can name a project elsewhere in California that's going to remove that many trees, let me know. This is the language from the EIR. As you can see, the 41,187 trees, grading and disturbance of 605 acres. Again, that's the size of Carmel. I tried to benchmark a figure for you guys to give you a feel for how many trees that is, how many trees 41,000 is. Friends of the Carmel Forest do an inventory of the trees in Carmel, and they came up with 8,900 trees of all kinds along streets and right-of-ways in public areas. So we're talking 4 or 5 times as many trees as are in Carmel right now. This is an example of what happens when Fort Ord land is clear cut. This occurred on CSUMB land about 6 years ago. So this was 16 acres that was clear cut. They removed 1,200 trees. You can see what happens to the land. Okay, I'd like to respond to the non-healthy tree issue. The myth, the trees on the MontereyDowns property are small, unhealthy scrub oaks and don't matter. The representative for MontereyDowns was quoted recently saying, we're not looking at full healthy trees. These are trees growing in sand. A lot of them are smaller. I would point out that all trees on Fort Ord are growing in sand. All the trees in Toro Park are growing in sand. That's the soil around here. That's not a reason to cut them down. 2 separate reports that are actually included as appendices in the EIR describe the forest as healthy, expanding, and hospitable to wildlife. Here's a quote from the forestry report. It describes the trees on Fort Ord. As you can see, the conclusion is that the forest is quite healthy. I'll be happy to answer any questions. As you can see, I couldn't pick a few enough topics to talk on, so thank you.
Thank you. First question. The draft EIR shows significant and unmitigated project and cumulative impacts on 13 intersections and 49 road segments. What projects would benefit, project benefits would offset these traffic impacts?
So there's 2 different things that happen as part of the capital improvement program that I talked about that fees are paid into. There's actually an entire traffic and transportation section on that. You have a lot of extensive road networks that are going in. You actually have another exit that's coming off of Highway 1. You have the east side roadway that needs to go in, whether or not our project is here. That's been part of the base reuse EIR since it was done. You have improvements to 68, you have improvements to 156. So all of those traffic mitigations have to go in for the project. We're required to put in, they determine for each of those intersections whether they need to be lights, whether they need to be road widenings, roundabouts. All of those things are determined by the city of Seaside. The mitigations that go in, they're the ones that decide those, not us. So they are all handled through that process.
It's not really my question. I would say, I would offer one correction. The East Side Parkway is not a mitigation, and it was not in the reuse plan. There was a road called East Side Road in the reuse plan as a traffic mitigation. It was a totally different alignment, type of road, and location. The East Side Parkway is it's a totally different animal. It's a very long road that cuts through the Fort Ord backcountry.
Michael, how do you respond to the fact that there is already a large amount of acreage for open space at the former Fort Ord?
I'd respond to that by saying a lot of the planning that's referenced, we go back to 1993, 1997. The world has changed. If you look at what happened, the groundswell of attention that Whispering Oaks got from the voters, from the public, the electorate, since we're here, this is League of Women Voters, the electorate is not interested in development in the Fort Ord backcountry. One of the sections I didn't get to because I ran out of time is the amount of blight that's adjacent to this proposal. There's about 100 acres of blight that people would have to drive by on the way to the entrance of MontereyDowns. So my response would be, times have changed, people's opinions have changed, resource demands have changed.
To start, I apologize for missing the second half of that last last question and getting it, and benefits are obviously, you have jobs and you have revenues and different things. In looking at the open space issue, one of the other benefits of development are the fees that we pay, again, that pays for the development that's here. On a $40 million needed endowment fund for open space, we pay $10 million of that. If you don't have the development, you have more open space that requires more money, but less people to pay for it. So you have the open space, more open space requires more money, less development equals less money to pay for that open space. So that would come back. Right now you have the developers, you have our project, East Garrison and those projects paying for it. Well, if we're not here, you're paying for it because that money is still needed, and in fact more will be needed, and you won't have us to pay for it, and so that comes back on the taxpayers. So that's a decision that would have to be made. The traffic mitigation and all of that is put on the developers. So we're the ones paying that in. So when you look at the open space, 72% is open space paid for by the development. So you've got to look at the cost of having more of that and less of the other.
The project would generate jobs and tax base. If the project is rejected, what would be job creation alternatives?
First, I'd adjust the tax base. Another section I didn't get to was the economic report, which showed that when the project was fully built out, it would add $1.2 million to the general fund in Seaside. Now, that's not a lot of money 20 years out. Adjusted for inflation, that's a very small amount of benefit to the city, and it's a long way out. So in the meantime, we should be looking at other ways to generate revenue. A really obvious one would be to promote the National Monument, get people coming to the National Monument. It's truly a unique asset that we have. It would be promotion of the National Monument, bringing in tourism, bringing in what I would call high margin dollars, using assets we already have versus chasing this really small amount of revenue way out in the future.
I think it's important to look at the base reuse plan as a whole and remember that when the base closed, 21,000 jobs were lost, 18,000 people had to move away. We have an entire segment of the population still not working, still trying to recover. Economically, $1.2 million may not sound a lot to some people, but for the city of Seaside, it's a huge part of their budget. It's also not considered an inflated money, so it's 1.2 in current tax dollars, that goes up. So I think you have to look at the people who need jobs and how they feel about what's going on. We do have an entire segment of population that was put without jobs, and they deserve to have those back. And that is why the base reuse plan has those 3 E's: environment, education, and economic recovery. And we have environment and we have education, and it's time to have the economic recovery and give those people back the jobs that they need and help Seaside and Marina recover from the loss of the base.
The next question relates to the horse park or racetrack. The news accounts have reported on a nonprofit component for the horse park. And how does that differ from a racetrack, and what entities would be required to approve a racetrack versus a nonprofit? Could you just explain all of that?
Okay, so the different components that are in the project, the Monterey Horse Park is a separate entity. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit entity. So it can get a little confusing because you have the entity Monterey Horse Park and also the component of the project of the Monterey Horse Park. And so that's a nonprofit entity, and what they would do is all the competitions and everything I talked about, the money, and obviously the goal is to make money, it goes back into the facility. So that's a nonprofit. One thing I should also note is that the racetrack portion is also a not-for-profit. It would be industry owned. So the profits for that would also go back into the facilities. This isn't something that I'm looking to own, something that we're putting together, but it would actually be owned by a not-for-profit in the thoroughbred industry. In order to be licensed and to run it, everything is regulated heavily by the state of California under the California Horse Racing Board. They're the ones that license and govern everything, race days, all of the things that happen with the state. and with the industry, so everything would have to go through them.
The Seaside City Council can simply vote to override significant and unavoidable impacts identified in the EIR. What are your comments on the public process given that reality?
For those of you who don't know, all the approvals for this project will take place in Seaside. That's why there's been such a focus on Seaside. The City Council does have the discretion to issue, I believe it's called a statement of overriding considerations, which would say no matter what, we feel that the benefit of this project is overrides the environmental impacts, the traffic impacts, the water impacts. Obviously, we would hope that the City Council would evaluate the EIR and the public comments and not issue a statement of overriding consideration.
So the process that we're going through with MontereyDowns is the same process that every project in the state of California goes through. This is not a unique process to us. This is how the state has it set up. The EIR is an informational document that only looks at environmental impact. It's an environmental impact report. It's one of many things that the City Council takes into consideration when they're looking at a project. They're looking at the economics and the jobs. They're also looking at the tentative map. They're looking at a variety of factors. So it is an informational document that they consider to have a full picture when they make that. So people will go through, we'll have a lot of open hearings, a lot of public meetings and everything for the city residents to learn about the project and talk to their city council members on how they want. But this is a process that works for every other one in the state, and that's why we're just getting started with the EIR, and there's a 60-day comment period. Then you have response, you have public meetings that everybody can attend to ensure that their voices can be heard. But this is the process used throughout the state.
Follow-up question. How did it come about that the city of Seaside became the lead agency on this project? And also, could you speak to the role of the Local Agency Formation Commission in the decision-making process?
So originally we were actually in unincorporated Monterey County. The entire project was in the county, and we weren't working with the city of Seaside at all. That is how the project started, and when it was brought to our attention that about the veteran cemetery, somebody was looking for somebody to take over the endowment parcel and put a project on there. The city of Seaside had put out requests for proposals on the endowment parcel twice, had gotten no responses, and they desperately wanted to find somebody to make sure the veteran cemetery could get started. When that happened, they asked us to take it on, and that's how we came into the city of Seaside. We had already been working with the county. So then we were working with the city and the county, and at that time the city of Seaside said, we're going to be the most impacted by this project. We want to be the lead. We think we should be the lead, and the county should respond. In the county general code, there is a provision that if it's a city-centric, if there's a city-centric project where a city is more impacted, the county then will let that city take the lead. That's happened in other projects in Marina, and that was done here. So our being in the city came second, thank you. But the city then requested, hey, since we're impacted, we would like to have that lead decision, and the county turned that over to them.
How did it come about that the city council made the decision, and what's the role of LAFCO?
The role of LAFCO, we didn't address it too much. The project involves annexation of a very large portion of county land. So LAFCO is it's separate from the county, it's separate from the city. It's its own board that will decide on approval of the annexation. Generally, what LAFCO is supposed to do is, actually one of their tenets is to discourage urban sprawl and plan orderly, provide for planning of orderly communities. So ultimately, though, that decision will be made by LAFCO, and that is not up to the voters.
If the total project is not completed because of water, how would that affect the economic analysis?
Well, the economic analysis looks at the different components of the project. If you look at the report, it's actually phased in many phases. It looks at each phase separately. So that's part of, if you've heard, there's been several versions that go out. It's a negotiating process. It's putting the information before the city. It's part of their decision-making process. So they look at what are the various components, what are the various economic portions of the components, what do we want first. They have moved, so they are looking to have a hotel into phase 1 because that brings in the TOT. It's a big generator for them. We believe that there's a demand through it between the school and the DOD that we can fill that, and they've asked for that in phase 1. So they look at each component, and that's how they decide this is when we want what built when, because it does cover the economics. The second thing that also has to be taken into consideration is the infrastructure of the roads and such. So they look at that as well. And as far as water, again, when you're looking at a 10 to 15 build out, that's where you're not looking at, you're looking at the water here today, but what's on the line and the requirement of Marina Coast to provide water. The only other thing I would add is that of that 852 acre feet per water, that is not all potable. Majority of that is reclaimed water used for that dust control and that irrigation. So we aren't looking all at potable water for that. And so they take all that into consideration. They determine the phases, and they determine what they want built when for economics.
So the question was, what happens if there's not enough water?
And in terms of the what effect does that have on the economic analysis? Does that economic analysis require being redone?
Well, from what we can tell is the phasing that's being presented, which, by the way, the developers are not bound to. They can change the phasing anytime they want. But the phasing that's being presented would have, if there's not enough water to build out, say, the track and the stadium and the shopping component, you would end up with a lot fewer jobs. You would end up with a subdivision, which could essentially be built anywhere. This concept that we have a housing shortage on Fort Ord is not accurate. There's already over 4,000 homes approved and unbuilt on Fort Ord. If you go back to the days of the housing boom in Seaside Highlands, the maximum take rate of housing was about 200 homes per year, and that was in the era of no docs loans and the loan crisis. So even if we went back to the maximum take rate on homes, we have over 20 years of housing already built in to Fort Ord with all the existing approved development. So if all the components of MontereyDowns don't happen and we just end up with a subdivision, there's not much benefit.
Michael, this is for you. Where are the 100 acres of blight you would see driving to MontereyDowns?
If you drive up Giggling Road, past the DOD Center, it's close to 100. I believe it's 92 acres. There's old barracks. I believe they're built in the 50s. They're concrete. They're very stout buildings. They've all the windows are broken. There's, I didn't get to show all the pictures I had, but there's illegal dumping going on. There's broken windows, graffiti, and this would be adjacent to MontereyDowns.
The only thing that I'd like to add to that is a majority of that land is actually CSUMB land, who went for a state grant to have those barracks removed. Some of it is also within the city of Seaside that would have a project on it. If all of the land on which you're seeing those buildings is already accounted for by different projects, and as part of it, they have to bring them down. So there isn't that land that's just being left and unaccounted for. Each one is accounted for. Also to note that the entire base has actually been determined to be federal blight due to the activities that's on it, and that's why you've had cleanup on it and all of that. But the buildings are actually all accounted for removal.
How many of the jobs created would be above the minimum wage? combined with if only 38 days of racing a year, how do you have full-time support type workers?
So looking at the minimum wage jobs, I mean, the first thing I'm going to say to that is I'm not really sure what's wrong with that. You have a lot of people who have to put food on families. Not everybody can be college educated and all of that. The jobs at the track is what I'm assuming people are looking for. Those are actually union jobs. There seems to be a big misconception of what goes on at the track. You have your parking or Teamsters, parimutuel is SCIU. Those jobs, your grooms, just so you know, grooms make $12 or $13 an hour minimum. You're looking at $26,000, $27,000. More than half of the jobs, over 1,700 of those, aren't even equestrian related in management, hospitality, retail, and all of those. So there is a full spectrum of the wages, a full spectrum of the education required, and the level of jobs throughout the project. There's something for everybody. But at the same time, I ask you to look at what about the constituency that does need jobs and look at those. The other part of it is if it's only 38 days of racing, how do you have full-time worker support? That is where it's a year-round training center. So the horses are there, the training is there, it's only 38 days of live racing, but you do have those jobs year-round training. That's where the horses would go up to Golden Gate for a day, they'd go, they'd come back, and that's how it'd be. So the jobs are there year-round.
On the subject of minimum wage jobs, my response to that would be when those minimum wage jobs come online, when the track is built, which I believe they're talking 15 to 20 years out, the base has already been closed for 21 years. So now we're talking another 20 years so we can get to minimum wage jobs. There has to be an alternative where we can bring in higher paying jobs. I haven't heard any indication from the representatives that there will actually be high paying jobs at MontereyDowns. I've heard there's nothing wrong with minimum wage, and that's debatable, but after such a length of time after the base being closed, we need to do better than minimum wage jobs.
How much of the housing being created would be considered affordable for low and very low income homeowners?
Well, by state law, there's 20%. Every housing project has that. That's mandated, that's determined, that's in City of Seaside ordinances as well as state law. So you have 20% there.
When the entire project is built out, who will own the commercial retail projects? Who will own the equestrian project? Who will be responsible for maintaining all the infrastructure such as the streets, curbs, gutters, etc.?
Okay, looking at the different components of the project. So it will be divided up. If you have the Monterey Horse Park, that would be owned by that 501c3. As I said, the sports arena, the racetrack, that would be by an industry, and actually the Thoroughbred Club would do a lease back from there, so that would be owned that way. The commercial we'd likely maintain in our group. That would be something that we would keep on, we would own. As far as streets, it kind of depends on what street. We have the streets that are the main streets, like the East Side Parkway, that's publicly owned and maintained. That's how that's been planned. The streets within the project and within the housing are actually privately owned, and those will be maintained by a homeowners group there. So you have people within the project that have some responsibility, as that was a requirement of the City of Seaside. You have the main roads that are public, and then you have the horse packers not-for-profit, and the other part's not-for-profit, and then we'll keep commercial.
The last question is, who are the financial backers of $MontereyDowns?
We have a private group that's put together that is fully funded this. We are over $8 million in, and all of the partners have put their capital in to fund the entitlement process. And then through the development, we have, as part of our process, shown up the financials, but quite frankly, As you can see us in the paper every day that Brian and I get vilified, this is not something that everybody wants to put themselves out there. So I have the task of taking the brunt of it, as has Brian, and the other people have asked not to be put through what we're put through on a regular basis. So I am going to honor that wish, and I'm not required to disclose it and will not.
I would like to thank our speakers very much for today's presentation. I think this has been very